Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
Well, Simon, back at last after our super extended summer break. And I guess we probably ought to start with an apology for last week where the technical gremlins ran us through.
Yeah, they did. But the lesson that we learned was if you're going to move your mixer desk and all of your setup around, don't dust your mixer desk because you accidentally press a button that basically disables the feedback from the computer to the mixer. That's the really stupid thing that I discovered shortly after saying, no, we can't do this. We're going to have to bail. But it's like a little tiny thing about the size of it's even smaller than my little fingernail. So
yes, so tragedy, but for those of you who are tuning in last week for In Liz We Trust, we will be running the episode next Sunday. But this evening's episode, we are turning our thoughts to the ocean, and we actually have another apology from the relatively newly formed Conservative Friends of the Ocean who wanted to be with us this evening, but unfortunately they are all at Conservative Party conference, which is their kind of official launch. So we haven't got them, but we have got a plethora, nay cornucopia of guests. Would that be fair, Simon?
We have indeed. So we welcome back to Sarah Shreeve from Stop the Sewage Southsea. And we welcome back Mike Owens from Hayling Sewage Watch. But they are also joined by Bob Bailey from Clean Harbours Partnership. So welcome all.
Good evening.
Hi.
Yeah, so
Hello.
So welcome, and yeah, I was listening to the radio this week, and I think Mike, you popped up on Greatest Hits Radio News, and I was bouncing up and down in my chair saying he's on the podcast on Sunday. So a moment of minor fame prior to coming and joining us.
And I didn't even hear it.
No worries. So if we can just start then by, please, could you introduce yourself? You're the group that you represent and kind of what the aims and ideals of that group is, maybe how you got involved. And can I start with Rob, please?
Good evening. Yeah. So Rob Bailey. I was a sea swimmer actually in Langston and Chichester Harbours, and a few of us became unwell in 2020. Just sort of nausea, diarrhea, the usual thing that sea swimmers are getting used to getting. So I said I'd find out to the group a little bit more about what's going on with this sewage rumour. And what I found out concerned us a lot. So I found out things like, actually from Mike, over 100 days of continuous untreated sewage discharge into our harbours each year. At the time, Natural England did their condition review of Chichester Harbour, and that found that the condition of the Chichester Harbour had been declining for the last 40 years or so. We found out that the Environment Agency did a little bit of water testing, but actually not very much. And when they did test, they found above acceptable levels of mercury in the water. They also found a thing called PBDE, the flame retardant in the water. So with that background, we started to search a little bit further, and we found the Chichester Conservancy kept saying the water quality is excellent. We also found local MPs saying there's nothing to worry about, but we knew there was. So we formed Clean Harbours Partnership with some interested parties around the harbour, mostly sailing clubs and residents associations. And our focus has become a piece of research called Project Spotlight. And we have a number of scientists looking at what's in the water for us. So we're doing biopsies on 5 different species. We're testing water samples, about 250 of them we've taken. And we're doing some eDNA testing as well. And those results are due probably just before Christmas. So that's been our focus and how we formed.
That's brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Rob. And can I ask the same question to Sarah, please?
Absolutely. So I'm Sarah. I'm from Stop the Sewage Southsea, and we were one a year ago. So exactly a year ago, this weekend, we held our first protest. Another angry sea swimmer is me. And there's now 5 of us, all sea swimmers, who are running Stop the Sewage. I think the sense of place is something that's really important to me for Stop the Sewage Southsea, and it's something that we were very inspired by Mike and Hayling Sewage Watch with. We've got a really good relationship with Surfers Against Sewage and their kind of national advocacy work, but I really believe that it's important for local groups who know their local climate, their local ecology, their local problems and issues to be able to speak to what is happening locally. And for us in Southsea, that is warning people when there's been discharges. And again, similar to Mike at Hayling, the recent issues with Southern Water's so-called upgrades to the warning systems have been causing us some concerns. But we've also been trying to really look at what we can do by working with local government and with our MPs to try and reduce the amount of sewage and things like that to minimise the amount of water that's getting into the storm overflow in the first place, because Portsmouth is such a densely populated city. There's a lot of gains that can be made there. We're trying to keep awareness really high. We're trying to keep the pressure on Southern Water. And I think another thing we're passionate about is working really effectively with other local groups. So working with Clean Harbours Partnership, working with Mike at Hayling Sewage Watch, and also other groups along the coast. We've got a great relationship with the Hastings guys. We've been speaking with Whitstable, and just making sure that nationally and locally the awareness and the pressure is raised and is kept up.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. And I guess our odd man out, who's a surfer, not a swimmer, Mike, over to you.
You got me. I'm an angry windsurfer. It's Mike here from Hayling Sewage Watch. Hayling Sewage Watch was formed maybe several years ago now. I can't even remember exactly when. After lots of people were found to be sick and infected. In fact, not from Hayling, but I suffered a decade ago hospitalisation from being in contact with sewage in the water somewhere else. So I decided to set it up. Basically, we try and keep our following and others around us informed about discharges. We call them brown alerts. We're really into lobbying Southern Water MPs, ministers, off EA, anybody that will listen to try and make a difference. Clearly, Southern Water are not. They talk a good game, but they're not actually doing a great deal, and they could be doing a lot more. So we're looking to have their arm twisted by others. We've had some success. We've got Beach Boy now. We've got real-time sewage monitoring, although it's not fully functional at the moment. That's off of Hayling. I can't talk too much about Beach Boy because I'm under some kind of vague NDA. So that's today. Tomorrow might be a different matter. The other thing I'm concerned about is warnings by local councils. When Southern Water say they have discharged our local beaches, they have some pretty sophisticated tools to confirm most of that. And local councils, certainly Havant Borough Council, are not listening, and they're not giving us warnings for the 700,000 people that visit our beach during the summer season. I think it's about it, you know.
Thank you, Mike. Simon.
So, with that in mind, and thank you and welcome all. And just for the record, we did send an invite to Southern Water and invite them an opportunity to give us a statement, but we didn't hear back from them. So unfortunately, we haven't got them joining the conversation. So what is it that I know we've kind of touched on it, but what is it that's actually being discharged into our waters, and why? Why is that happening? And if I can give that first to Sarah.
We'll start with the primary school teacher, and then the guys can add probably the complexity onto the top. So the first thing and the most obvious thing that got me worried and started Stop the Sewage Southsea, and obviously probably also for Mike over at Hayling Sewage Watch, and for Rob when he got poorly, is sewage. So sewage meaning human waste, number ones, number twos, and they're containing pathogens and different bacteria. So then we have concerns about things like E. coli, Staphylococcus, antibiotic resistant bacteria. Those are the things that are in our poo and our wee and come out into the sea. I'll talk about how they get there in a minute when I've listed some of the other things. But as Rob alluded to, and I think part of the reason that Clean Harbours Partnership has such a great name, whereas I went straight for the sewage, is that's not the end of the story, and that's not the only issue we're talking about. So anything that you ingest can come out of you in your excreta, shall we call them? And that includes all of the medications and drugs that you may take, whether recreational or prescribed. So we're talking about things like hormones from the pill, endocrine disruptors, antidepressant medication, Class A drugs have been found, which is a nice thing to think about. And those things come out in our sewage as well. That's a problem because it might not give you an upset tummy in the same way, but there's two different issues going on. One is a lot of the animals, the flora and fauna that live in the sea are much, much, much smaller than human. So a dose that is passing out of you might be a huge dose for a limpet or a tiny worm or a fish, and then they build up within the ecosystem. Alex Ford at Portsmouth University has done loads of research into this, but there's a series of lakes in Canada where they can test different things, and they put the level of antidepressants that comes out in sewage into one of the lakes, and the fish just stopped being scared of birds of prey. So you've got herons sweeping down and this really chill fish just like, yeah, eat me, it'll be great. Probably not the best for the ecosystem, and those things are coming out. And then we have like the microplastics, the cleaning chemicals, all the things that you wash down your drain. And we've seen microplastics crossing the placenta. We've seen microplastics in fish at incredible depths. So anything that you eat or drink or ingest or put down your sink can end up in the sea. And the reason that that happens is that we have a Victorian sewage system that was built to stop us all getting dysentery from throwing our excrement into the middle of the road. It has not kept pace with the level of housing and development, but also the amount of paving over permeable surfaces that we've seen as a result of people having driveways and people having patios and all those sorts of things. That means in storms, the amount of water entering our sewage system is so high, the sewage treatment plant can't cope to treat it all. They store as much as they can in storage tanks, but those storage tanks are nowhere near big enough for the amount of water that is mixing with sewage and coming out into their sewage works. So they say to stop it backing up and coming out of your toilet or coming out of your sink, they have to take the pressure off the system, and they do that by something called a combined storm overflow, where it circumvents the sewage system and just goes straight out into the sea. That's my summary.
Well, thank you. That was very comprehensive. That was as summary as you could make for that. Crikey, so it's not just the actual waste that's the problem. Michael, Rob, did you want to add anything to that at all?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I've got to say, Sarah, that was a pretty comprehensive assessment of the situation and accurate too. I think, Southern Water have known that they've had a Victorian sewage system for probably well over 100 years, or certainly since their formation. And so, complaining that their sewage system is outdated and failing as a result of a massive surprise that it's Victorian is just doesn't wash with me. And as Sarah said, that the biggest problem we have is making provision for, around here anyway, for the treatment of 420,000 toilet users and their drives and their roofs in rainfall, and not heavy rainfall, by the way. It's not always heavy rainfall these days. Sometimes it's moderate rainfall, and and of course that pollutes our harbours. The actual treatment of this vast volumes of discharge. The treatment work at Bubbs Farm treats about 109 million litres a day from 420,000 toilet users, which is a phenomenal amount. But when you are right at your very ceiling and it rains, that's a huge problem. And they've only got 7,000 cubic meters. I was going to quote you in litres here. 7,000 cubic meters of stormwater storage, and quite often that fills up well within an hour, and then they have to spill it into the harbour. And don't listen to them when they say it's been partially treated. It's been screened for wet wipes and sanitary products, and maybe the odd cotton bud, but all of the fecal pathogens associated with that are still in the water. And they will also tell you it's settled in that some of this stuff settles to the bottom and doesn't get released. Well, I think that's a bit of a leg pull, really. So that's all I'm going to say for now.
Okay, I mean, it seems like we're kind of definitely moving to the next question, unless there was something you wanted to add to that one, Rob, before we move on.
Yeah, I'd just say, actually, pick up something that Sarah said, that I think quite often southern water are seen as the lightning conductor for this problem, and there are other polluters as well. It's just worth mentioning them to put it in context, I think. Some of the main ones being highway runoff. When it rains, what comes off the highways? That's rubber, of course, petrochemicals, metals. There's also agricultural runoff, pesticides and fertilizers. And there's things like landfill. So there's lots of landfill around Langstone Harbour from the old days. And even things like, just recently they've found a thing called DDT on Thorney Island in the sediment. So DDT was used there apparently as an experiment against mosquitoes back in, let's say, 1940s. So it's been there about 80 years. And this stuff is seeping into the water. So there's many elements to this cocktail of sources, but also what's actually in the water itself. And coming through wastewater treatment plants, some of the scientists reckon there's quite often, depending on the size of the treatment works, there's between 10 and 50,000 different chemicals come through. And because there are many thousands of chemicals invented every year, and our Victorian system's not used to dealing with that.
Exactly, Rob. I was going to say, one of the things I was really surprised to learn as I got more into this information was even water that has made it through the full plethora of treatment at Bubbs Farm won't have had all of the things that we've just spoken about removed from it. There's like a gold standard of screening that happens in some Scandinavian sewage works, where we're able to remove the hormones and the antidepressants and some of those chemicals, but that isn't currently part of the waste removal process. They've had conversations about it linked to the separate question of this Havant Thicket reservoir, because if water recycling will be happening, then obviously we need to be getting those things out so that they're not building up and up and up in that system. But as it currently stands, even if that droplet of water has gone through everything Bubbs Farm can throw at it, it may be free of pathogens, but it won't be free of all of the different substances and compounds that we've spoken about just now.
Yeah, and so, for example, we know that Bubbs Farm was used by the government for COVID testing during the pandemic. We know that polio has been found in East London, in the treatment works in East London. Usually it's the stuff you can't see that concerns us, but sometimes it's the stuff you can see. So many listeners would have heard about the wet wipe island up on the Thames, where there's an island about the size of a football pitch, I understand, made up of wet wipes from the Twickenham wastewater treatment works.
Wow,
lots of stuff there.
Yeah, and I guess as we look at this, when we look at the sort of local landscape, obviously, Sarah's touched on the fact Portsmouth is densely populated, and Havant and Hayling Island, there are always new housing developments springing up, and I guess there's a feeling that perhaps the water companies should have seen this coming, Is it a case of they've been slow out of the blocks, or is it a case that, with more severe storms happening more frequently, is it something that really is just inevitable? I'd like to put that first to Mike.
I think what we're seeing here, it's not Southern Water's fault per se. This is as a result of significant failure of government regulation, specifically the Environment Agency and Ofwat. They should have seen this coming, and because they don't have much in the way of resources, they're just not dealing with this adequately, and that's why Hayling Sewage Watch are quite happy to get MPs under the microscope to see what they're actually doing. It's not inevitable. I mean, with more homes, for every home that we build, we've got roofs, we've got driveways, we've got streets. All of that water, when it rains, goes into the drains, which actually exacerbates the stormwater storage issue associated with the additional toilet users that use the toilet and all their cleaning products, etc. So, the solution is really quite simple. If you haven't got enough infrastructure to cope with the toilet users you have and the amount of water the area in question generates in terms of generating stormwater overflows, just don't build any more houses until you do. I mean, that's seems simple on the face of it, but that's not what's happening at the moment.
So, Sarah, Rob, can I invite you in on that?
Yeah, I could say I've been in business for 30 years, and I don't think I've seen a sector where you've got more foresight than this one. They actually know through local plans that there are thousands of houses on their way. So I think, from memory, Portsmouth is planning circa 17,700 or so.
Yep.
Haven't many thousands, but they are in and around the local plans. People know. So there's a long-term view over 10 to 15 years of what's coming down the pipes, ironically. But also short-term, because they know what's being built and when they're coming on stream. This has been it is very rare foresight that the actual the water companies have. At the same time, the Environment Agency will know what will happen by not having the extra infrastructure. So it's an industry that's had incredible foresight and seems to have done very little about it.
And I think in the cynic in me says that's, as Mike was saying, the lack of regulation and the fact that they've been empowered to just make profit rather than reinvest into the infrastructure that is necessary. Even I had assumed that the fines that were paid last year would have been reinvested in the infrastructure, but they've gone straight into the Chancellor's pocket. So that 90 million hasn't come back into the infrastructure. And I know that I know Portsmouth better than I know Havant, but the housing targets are externally set by government, but it's the same government that aren't holding the water companies to account. So the lack of joined up thinking is really confusing. I think it's also incredibly frustrating because the research and the thinking is there. So we've been working with Southern Water, with the council, looking at sustainable urban drainage schemes, and these are pilots that have run successfully on the Isle of Wight, where they make road coverings permeable and they use runoff drains to basically reduce the amount of stormwater going into the drain, so that what gets to the sewage works is concentrated sewage. And new build estates split their grey water from their sewage water, so that they're trying to keep all of the road runoff and the roof runoff and the gutter water separate from the sewage when they're building the new estates. The problem is there has been no incentive for these as private businesses to reach a gold standard or a silver standard or even a bronze standard. The incentivization has been to do the absolute bare minimum, to maximise profits. And that's where the infrastructure has suffered, and why we find ourselves in a position where we know the technology is there, we know there's different solutions to the problem, but none of them have been implemented because there's been no regulation or incentivisation by the government for it to happen.
There is a thing called Southern Water, called a smart water butt, and the idea is that when it rains, your roof empties its content into a water butt, and using some marvelous technology, it releases after the rain is gone in a controlled way, which stops stormwater sewage discharges. And they're saying very loudly, this is what a fabulous idea this is. The problem is that if you apply for those, as I did, you'll find that you are not, in this area, actually allowed to have one, because they don't supply our water. They only deal with our sewage. They don't supply our water. And therefore, out of their 4.5 million customers, $700,000 from Fareham all the way across to Littlehampton area are actually supplied by Portsmouth Water Company, and so therefore we don't get those things. So,
and we've been exploring it as part of this local government plan to try and get the storm overflow in Portsmouth right down, but then we end up in this bizarre situation that Mike and I find where we're getting warning signs put in on the seafront for when there's been sewage outflows from Portsmouth City Council, but not from Havant Borough Council. And we're now trying to get smart water butts as part of our sustainable urban drainage system, because the council are really driving it forward. And it shouldn't be the case that it's patchworked depending on how bothered your council is. It's not like our sewage pollution will stop halfway across Langstone Harbour and will only stay on the Hayling side because Havant Borough Council haven't supported sustainable urban drainage. We all share the water, we all share the coastline. It shouldn't be this ad hoc.
They do kind of support SUDS, but if you've got to look at SUDS in the round, because SUDS is all about stopping more rainwater getting into the system. And therefore, if maybe you've got 1 million, say you've got 1 million toilet users, and they generate a certain amount of wastewater. If you can reduce the amount of rainwater getting into the system, you can actually stop some of the stormwater discharges. But what you are actually doing is increasing the concentrations of excrement in said wastewater, because you are removing some of the rainwater. So SUDS isn't the be all and end all here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'd like to pick up on just a question here. Perhaps I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, but whilst I think that the housing targets and everything you say are very, again, a point I hadn't thought of, Sarah, in terms of, I've got a hard standing at the front of my house that used to be a garden, and I'm sat in the extension with a patio out of it, which again used to be grass. But isn't the root cause here really more about the climate change? And we get very dry periods, and then I remember hearing at the end of a very hot summer when we got some rain, well, it was almost the wrong sort of rain at the wrong time, and the parched ground wouldn't soak it up, so it was going to run off and cause those. So isn't the root cause the fact that our rainfall has become more, should we say, sporadic, and we're getting these surges? Or am I being too kind in that we're getting these discharges when there isn't a storm surge?
I'd say there's elements of truth in both. So as Mike said, we're getting discharges in moderate or light rain now, and sometimes we're getting discharges when there's no rain at all, or when they haven't told us that they're happening, which is concerning. I think global warming certainly has a part to play, but also if we pave over grass and trees, we're contributing to the global warming.
Yep.
So around they go. I think the type of rain has definitely, is it like biblical rain events? Is that what they're calling them? Certainly a part of it. I think the loss of permeable surfaces can't be understated, because we just don't know what those biblical events how they would interact with a more permeable, more green landscape because we don't have one. So that's putting even more pressure on the grass and the green that we do have when the biblical rain event happens. I think the other thing that we haven't touched on is how water hungry our lifestyle has become. When you look at the frequency of washing clothes, washing ourselves, showers, baths, dishwashers, the amount of water that you can use in your day-to-day life. My granny had a scullery with a pump in the back garden, and we had to persuade her to kind of bring it up into the house.
Go
And
mainstream.
when we bought our house here on Bonchurch Road, we didn't have a sink in our kitchen. We only had one in the utility room. And the amount of grey water produced from our modern way of living is also far higher. So I think it's a bit of a trifecta of carnage on an antiquated system that has not been invested in and has not kept pace with the problems we're having. But as Mike has pointed out, even when it's not raining sometimes, or very light rain, we're getting the discharges, which is a different question.
I might also add that there are lots of people projecting climate change, aren't there? So as a professional business, they should have that in mind as well when they're making their decisions.
Indeed. Simon.
Well, we kind of started touching on it in the answers to that one. So I guess then, what powers does the Environment Agency have to detect discharges, or off what for their part of the kind of the equation? What powers do they have to detect and detect these discharges and enforce compliance? And if I can ask that first to Rob, and if you can, what powers do they have, and maybe what powers you'd like them to have. I think Sarah kind of has kind of already given her answer to that one, but we'll still go through. So, Rob, what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, yeah, I sort of layer on to Sarah's comments. Really, I think there's always a lot of an outcry for we need more powers to stop things happening. I'd take a contrary view. I think they already have a lot of powers. What I'd like to see is them using it. And to bring that into context, they operate under something called the Enforcement and Sanctions Policy. And that's designed to stop illegal pollution. It's designed to put right the harm. And it's designed to punish those that offend. 3 things. And it also has 3 priorities. So they will prioritize activities that are causing the most harm. They will prioritize where the breach undermines the regulatory framework, and they'll also prioritize where they suspect criminal activity is happening. And actually, I would argue the water company is doing all 3. So the £90 million fine that we all know about, that was criminal activity. That's criminal activity. It is what they were doing was breaching, undermining the regulatory foundations, and there was massive risk causing massive damage. It was, I think, the biggest environmental crime the Environment Agency has come up against in 25 years. So the water companies are doing all of these things, and yet against the background, I think they say 400,000 discharges of untreated sewage a year in the round. There've been 7 prosecutions last year, 2021, and there's been 5 so far this year. So my argument is they have the powers, they're just not doing it.
Why do you? The obvious follow-on to that then is, why do you think that is? Then why do you think they're not using the powers they have?
The headline has always been that there being lack of funding. That's always the headline. Whether there's something culturally going on as well, actually, whether the water companies have got too smart for them as well, I don't know, but they are not monitoring and inspecting and fining like I think they should do. So what would you do as a commercial organisation? You take advantage of that. The water companies mark their own homework, and the policemen don't have many funds.
Okay.
So
and it's worth mentioning, on top of what Rob said there, is that he alluded to it, is that Southern Water, Rob said they mark their own homework. What they're actually doing is they're self-policing their own regulatory discharges, and then letting the Environment Agency know. The Environment Agency isn't camped out on the end of their outfalls to record what's going on. They get told by Southern Water.
Can I give it a little example? We found on the River Lavant, actually, that flows into Chichester Harbour, we found that Southern Water at the Lavant Wastewater Treatment Works had been, for 6 months every year, discharging untreated sewage into a rare chalk stream about 8 foot wide. And according to the Environment Agency's own figures, that's about 75 million litres a year, 30 Olympic swimming pools a year into a little chalk stream. And actually it gets worse because the chalk stream dries out in the summer. So actually what you have flowing down into Chichester and into the harbour is actually a river of effluent. And yet there are no fines.
No, Grim Stone, you say whether marking their own home. So, Sarah, it sounded like you had something to add there.
I completely agree with Rob and Mike. I think the other thing that the amount of work that Clean Harbour Partnership put into documenting and working with the Environment Agency about that river in Lavant was huge, and we're still not seeing fines or anything coming of it. But at a level much smaller than that, I think both Mike and I see multiple times a month people coming to our group saying, I've been sick, my dog is ill, this has happened, that has happened. And because nothing seems to happen when they make those reports, it disincentivizes people continuing to report it. And Mike's got a great graphic, it's got the phone number, it tells people what to do, it takes you through all the steps. Could not hold your hand and make it simpler, but people just get really demoralized because they're like, well, I'm already puking. If nothing's going to happen from me ringing this person while I puke, why would I bother? So I think that in turn reduces the amount of reporting because people become disillusioned, they become frustrated, and the number of witnesses and testament to what is going on becomes less due to apathy and frustration.
And it's not helped because when you do that to the Environment Agency, and you report a pollution incident, they if it's not a major one, they'll put it into file 13, the bin.
So it looks like the picture you paint is currently of a pretty grim situation. And again, I as I ask the question, I fear I know the answer. You know, there is a new environment bill coming. You know, do you have hopes for that, or as Rob has sort of touched on, is it just a case of more, you know, it's another piece of paper that maybe doesn't get enacted? And Mike, can I start with you?
I think Mike dropped out and dropped back into the chat, but his connection seems to be a bit slow. I don't know if you want to.
Should I take that one, if you like?
That would be lovely, Rob. Thank you.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of debate earlier this year about what they called the Duke of Wellington's amendment to the Environment Bill, Amendment 45, and that sought to do two things really. The amendment sought to put a duty on the water companies to demonstrate progressive improvement, first of all, and the second thing, it required Secretary of State, Ofwat, and the Environment Agency to ensure compliance. What it actually did was much weaker. So it focused on storm overflows only, not the sewage discharge from the whole system. And it didn't put that specific duty of care on the Secretary of State and Ofwat and the EA. And on the timing on the storm overflows, they put targets in, great. But the idea is to stop 85% of the storm overflows by 2035.
Oh.
So 13 years' time. And to stop storm overflows completely by 2050. So that means the babies being born today will be 28 by the time they stop doing this. It's just not quick enough, really. So I think what we're asking for is a bit more scale and pace to this whole thing. So the Environment Bill was a disappointment. We welcome the focus on this particular issue, but it's a disappointment.
Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, I would agree. The fact that the 75% may not even include some of our local outflows by 2035. The 25% will still be kicking out until 2050. And even those that are done in 13 years, that's the whole childhood of a child born now. They'll be a teenager before the sea is clean. I think as well, it really felt like a virtue signaling exercise for me, because for a lot of the actions that were included in it, there was no timescales and no accountability. So they want collaborative planning with water companies and mapping sewer networks, but there was no time frame attached. They didn't have any expectation on there needing to be an environmental conscience for the actions that water companies took. So there was no wording about the solutions needing to be environmentally friendly. Like, according to the Environment Act, you could pour concrete over the whole of Langstone Harbour and build 75 storage tanks, but that wouldn't necessarily be a great idea in a site of specific scientific interest. And another thing for me after the COVID issues is there was no acknowledgement of the fact that actions need to be taken through tender and transparent processes and not given out to their cronies and shell companies, like we saw with the ferries, like we saw with the PP, the personal protective equipment. There was a lot of things that on first reading looked really good, but the second you stop and dug into it, it was just smoke and mirrors with very little meaningful action over a ridiculously extended time frame with no accountability. And yeah, bad thing. I'm going to stop ranting now.
No,
Back in my books.
I think the message has come through very clearly, Sarah. Just in the interest of time, Mike, can I just ask, have you got anything else you want to add to that quickly?
Yeah, just briefly. One thing that the Environment Bill does is that it does, in my view, it legalises pollution. It doesn't actually stop what's going on. What they're saying is that the water companies are responsible to reduce the impact of stormwater sewage discharges, not the sewage discharges themselves. And they are, frankly, not the same thing. They are quite different. And what you'll get is, as Sarah alluded, that Southern Water will fix the cheapest ones that it costs to fix first, and the more expensive ones, the more difficult ones later. Some of those will probably be around our area. They're just basically lacking in ambition. The other thing I would say is that Southern Water said that they wouldn't be in favour of making any more stormwater tanks because it would require pouring concrete, which, as we all know, is a pretty high carbon intensive activity. But you know, both of our harbours are the two biggest carbon sinks in our area, and pouring a little bit of concrete to stop polluting said carbon sinks, which are being destroyed by the sewage, it just doesn't make sense. And Southern Water haven't really come up with a credible explanation or plan about that.
Simon.
So thank you. Yeah, that doesn't really bode well, does it? So one of the things that we've seen kind of publicised is calling for consumers to cancel their direct debits to wastewater companies. Is this really something that people should do, or is it really actually just going to hurt them in the long run and cause them problems rather than actually cause an issue for the companies themselves? And if I can ask that first to Sarah.
Yeah, we talked about this at Stop the Sewage Southsea, and we have a group of people who are really interested in this as a way of protesting and are looking into it further. There are other groups along the coast that have actually been split due to disagreement about this, and people have really, really strong feelings. My opinion is it's a demonstration of how frustrated people are and how little outlet they feel they have to make their frustration heard, and how powerless people feel to do something about this issue when it is affecting a massive part of their lives. But something I'm really conscious of for Stop the Sewage, like I said at the start, about local groups needing a sense of place and knowing their own communities. We have an awful lot of people involved in our campaign who live in social housing or military housing. We've got a lot of naval families that are involved. We've got people saving up for their first homes. We've got people who are trying to get their credit ratings up and getting out of debt. And I'm incredibly apprehensive for those people to be living with long-term personal financial ramifications of stopping their direct debits when Southern Water will have very little ramifications against them. And that's not to say I do not empathise entirely with the feeling of frustration and powerlessness and the desire to do something about it. But I really, really don't want people to not be able to get a mortgage or not be able to consolidate debt and improve their financial situation because of Southern Water throwing the book at them. Now, I know that that may vary for different people based on personal circumstances, and I'm really thrilled that people are passionate enough to act on this issue. But a really good friend of mine says there's a Bible verse somewhere that says, weigh the cost before going to war. And something I say to people that tell me they're considering it is, well, weigh the cost. Go in with your eyes open, do your research, look at how this can be, look at the other ways you can protest, you can be involved. And if on that, for you, that's the right decision, that's your decision to make. But we were conscious of our group, of our demographic, of the people we were working with. And the other thing I was very passionate about is I didn't want anyone to feel that they were less involved in the campaign or less valid or less passionate because they couldn't take that action. It's really important to us that we give people a lot of really meaningful outlets and really positive ways to express their discontent, so that they can still feel that they're putting the pressure on Southern Water, they're holding them accountable, they're making their case, without having to feel this is their only option for activism and advocacy.
Thank you. Was there anything, Michael or Rob, you wanted to add to that one at all?
I would, well put, Sarah. I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's wrong to risk having county court judgments against you and bailiffs. At the end of the day, I think the numbers are something like Southern Water's revenue is about 800 million a year, 4.6 million customers. So to make 1% difference, that's 46,000 people have got to get together and not pay it. So I think it's not going to achieve very much. So it doesn't get my recommendation.
I kind of agree with that. At Hayling Sewage Watch, I was mindful of harming people's credit rating, which is the bottom line here. We do know that Southern Water are considering sending bailiffs to recover some of these costs, and that's not going to do your credit rating any good. And as Rob says, it makes a great point, and it's really good from a press perspective. But yeah, it probably does more harm to the person withholding money than it does us.
Okay.
So if we focus on possible support, the local MPs, how supportive have they been as a group or as individuals? And I'll start with yourself, Mike.
So I have to say, it's really echoing. I don't know everyone else. I have to say that I'm on a Southern Water forum, and in the inaugural one had the Minister of the Department. It had several MPs, Ofwat, DA, and the CEO of Southern Water. And by and large, I think MPs, they like to talk to the Parliament and they don't actually do anything. So I think that of the 7 MPs that I've been with, Penny Mordaunt definitely being very supportive of what I'm doing, not publicly or anything else. She's been very supportive of what I'm doing. I think the MP for Harbours and Mac, I don't want to play the guy down. He's not really getting his hands dirty here, and he really does need to because of the situation in his constituencies. He actually set up the Southern Water Forum, and he'll tell you that it's his idea alone. And by the way, did I tell you it was Alamac's idea? But actually, the substance of what's going on isn't good enough. Hopefully, it'll get better. We've got another meeting in a couple of weeks, so maybe they're up their game. But currently, only there's an odd star in our midst.
Sorry, I hope we could at least kind of get the gist of that. Sorry, Mike. I think there's a kind of like a bit of a problem with the line there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So, if you could put yourself on mute, please, Mike, that would be grand, because I think there is some echo coming through. So, in terms of MP support, Sarah, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, one of the few benefits of the mad political situation in Portsmouth, I've got the echo too now, is I think all three parties have been really, really involved with this. And I'd say 5, because the Greens and the Independents are also involved too. Stephen Morgan has held events, and so has Penny Mordaunt, both holding kind of big public forum events about the sewage issue, which is great. The only frustration I've had with Penny's side is I wish that she hadn't voted against the Wellington Amendment. It's really hard when people are saying one thing at a local level and engaging with local constituents, but then voting differently in Parliament. But there's probably a lot going on behind the scenes there that I know nothing about and don't understand. So that is what it is. I think the other thing I'd add, although they're not MPs, is that the City Council and the Lib Dems have also been very supportive with those meetings with Southern Water and looking at planning and the sustainable urban drainage piece. So we've got great buy-in from all three. Stephen voted against the government version of the Environment Act, and Penny voted for it, but at a local level they've both been very hands-on, and I'm sorry that my echo is still going.
Rob, did you want to have a try?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just add a couple of points actually. One is the new Secretary of State for the Environment is a relatively local MP. He's MP for North East Hants, Ranil Jayal Wadena. So I hope he can do the right thing. And also the new chair of the Environment Agency started yesterday, I think. And he is apparently a local man, so he'll certainly understand the impact on chalk streams. And his background is actually on customer dissatisfaction with the water industry. So 2 more big influences into this debate, who I hope will make a difference.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, so I guess then the last thing is the really important. How do people get involved with your campaigns? How can they contribute? And do you have any events coming up? If I can give that to Sarah first. Give me a second to just unmute you.
Perfect. Oh, no echo. Amazing. So we have got our the echo's back. We've got our Stop the Sewage Protestival next weekend, which we're super excited about. Linking to what we said about non-payment, we wanted to be giving people a really great opportunity to get their voices heard, to stand up and hold Southern Water accountable, and in a really positive way. So on Friday we have our Round the Island poo relay, which is starting from South Parade Pier with the rowers. We've got anglers, canoers, gig rowers. We've got someone playing their Alpen Crappen horn from a rowing boat in Langstone Harbour, and we're finishing off with dog walkers round to Eastney, and then a sea swimming relay all the way down to South Parade on Saturday morning. We've got our protest at the pier, and then just to make sure that we're sending people away with some real inspiration and positivity, not just anger, we've got got great local organisations joining us for a little festival in the garden of Cumberland's House Natural History Museum. So we've got the Seahorse Trust, Greenpeace, Vinyl Straw Solent, Hampshire Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, all sorts of different groups. We've got family activities like beach cleans and quizzes, and we've got live music with Pompey Plucker's ukulele band. We've got a community choir, and then Janet Ayres is coming to lead some protest singing. So it's a full day, 11 till 5, protest 11:30 at South Parade Pier on the 8th of October, and we'd love to see anyone that's free.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And if I can just come to Mike, I'll be sharing the any links into the comments on with our with the uploads. So please do make sure we've got those. Mike, how can people join in the campaign at Hayling Sewage Watch, and have you got any events coming up?
Well, I think the first thing is that everyone needs to get themselves over to Portsmouth next week. It sounds incredible. There's lots going on there. On Hayling, I am working with a bunch of other campaign groups to a more southeast protest, and that's basically in the pipe at the moment, which is it's essentially going to involve lots of people sitting on porcelain, reading the Times or Southern Water magazines in some pretty unusual places, and lots of people wearing brown and waving brown bags and flags and banners, that sort of thing. Look out for that. Beach Boy, as somebody's already said, is not doing perhaps all it should be doing. It's on the workshop. I'm not allowed to say too much about that, but something we have to do.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mike. And last but not least, Rob.
Yeah, you can find out about Harbours Partnership by going to our website and leaving us a message, which is cleanharborspartnership.co.uk. Simple as that. In terms of our forthcoming sort of events, no events, but our research is sort of just coming to fruition now. So between now and Christmas, we will be informing people about what we've found of what's in the water, what pharmaceuticals, what pesticides. That'll be before Christmas. And if you'd like to keep in touch and know about that, then go to the website and leave us a message.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you to all of our guests today. Whilst it's been it's not been an easy lesson, because it's very clear that the struggle is real, and there's much more to do. I think on behalf of all of the listeners and the communities that live by the sea, we'd like to thank you all for your efforts and the continued ongoing struggle. And hopefully next Saturday is a grand event, Sarah. So you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guests have been Sarah Shreeve from Stop the Sewage Southsea, Bob Bailey from the Clean Harbours Partnership, and Mike Owens from Hayling Sewage Watch. And I've been Simon Sansby. Join us next week at 6:27 when we ask if in Liz we trust.